This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joire.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joire, and today is Tuesday, February 12th, 2019, and my guest is no other than Helena Stone of GeekSpin. Hi, Helena, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I was like, I haven't had you in a while, and it's always fun to have you on, so I'm really excited to have you.
Well, I'm glad I didn't scare you off the last time.
No, why would you? Come on. You know your phones, you know your mobile tech, you know your laptops and all that good stuff. Speaking of, you went to the G7, Moto G7 launch briefing event thing in New York. I couldn't go because of New York. And I would love to hear your take on the three G7 phones that you got to play with.
Well, sure. Well, like the G7 family, in a way, it's one of the most iconic yet underrated smartphone families.
Totally.
Because it really invented like the budget smartphone that didn't suck, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, you kind of like forget about it because everybody talks about flagships, right?
I know.
But yet, like, it's still like I think it's Motorola's best-selling phone. Am I correct with that logic? I feel like I heard that somewhere. But either way, it's definitely one of Motorola's most successful handsets in recent years. I still don't get why they have 3 different flavors. To me, it's too much. I would like 2 flavors of phone, but that's just me.
In the past, It's been 2, right? I think they've always had the Play version and then the regular, but this time they added this new, what is it, Power version?
Yeah, so I'm not sure. Because I do feel like with Motorola, they tend to have lots of different models. And sometimes like they'll have like an extra variation that will come out in like South America or like, overseas and not necessarily in the US.
That's right. That's what it was like last year with the G6, which I reviewed for Big GeekSpin, actually.
Right, exactly. But yeah, it seems like all 3 of these handsets, as far as I know, are going to be coming to the US. I haven't heard otherwise anyway. And they're all priced between $199 to $299. So they're really targeting that budget segment, but they're kind of like going after a little bit of the OnePlus crowd as well. At least with the $299, I think that they're like getting up there. And when you look at the G7, which is at the top of the line from this new family, it's a pretty sweet phone. Like it almost can compete with the likes of the OnePlus.
Right.
And I think that's what makes it such a good value, that for $299, you're getting a really pretty sweet phone.
Yeah. I got the feeling from, living vicariously through all your coverage, yours and others that went to the briefing, that they're going a little more upmarket. I mean, as much as you can with a mid-range phone, of course. But because last year, when I reviewed the G6 regular for you guys, it was basically just, what is it, $250 or so? So it was kind of more occupied by what the Power one is occupying this year, right?
Sure. Well, when I had my hands on with the phones, one thing that struck me right away was that there's a really big difference when you hold the G7 Play to when you hold the G7. It's a drastic difference. Like the feel, the finish, the G7 feels like so much more of a premium phone. So really, as you're going up for with $100 in price, you're getting a very drastically different experience. I
mean, it's definitely the one to get, the G7, it seems like. Let's actually go over some of the specs real quick, right? So the thing about the G7 series this year is that unlike previous G series, which as you pointed out is one of the best-selling lineups and one of the kind of darling of the media in terms of its bang for the buck, right? We all love the G series because it's year to year has been great phones all along, right? It's now got the same processor, right? On all of them, which I think is really quite interesting.
I thought so too. I thought it was an interesting move on their part, but I guess that's how they managed to keep costs down.
Yeah, and then they varied the amount of RAM from 2 on the base on the Play to 3 on the Power to 4 on the actual G7, the $300 one, which I really thought that was really interesting. I was like, wow, okay.
Also, sorry to cut you off,
2 gigs is not very much, right?
It's not. It's not enough, but it's a $199 phone.
But it's weird because, the Snapdragon 632, by the way, that's the chip that's powering all three, is kind of like a pretty damn decent processor. And I feel that it's going to choke on 2 gigs of RAM. Like, I don't even think you want that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I didn't play with it enough because I was focused more on the G7 because it was prettier.
Of course,
so
yeah.
I'm guilty of that. But yeah, I think that's something that's really going to come out when you actually get to testing the device.
Yeah. So then the other thing is interesting is that, of course, the G7 Play is smaller and it's made of plastic. And it has a single camera in the back, correct? And a 720p display. The Power also has a 720p. So it's a 5.7-inch 720p display on the Play. And it's plastic, not metal, this phone.
Yeah.
And that's probably why it feels so different when, as you said.
It doesn't feel bad on its own until you compare it to like the G7, and then you're like, yeah, they're just completely different ball games there. It's just not the same at all.
Right. So we've got basically a 5.7-inch 720p display in a plastic case with a notch and quite a bit of a chin. That's the base model, the 200, and that's 2 gigs of RAM on a Snapdragon 632. And I'm trying to look up the camera details here. I don't see them anywhere, but it's got a single camera. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. I think it's just like a generic 13 megapixel single rear camera on the G7 Play.
I don't recall offhand, and I think that's because just lately, when it comes to like megapixel numbers, they don't mean anything. So I've kind of stopped paying attention. You have to use the phone and to really see the performance. Numbers mean nothing nowadays.
But I mean, what I'm saying is generally like, there's only a handful of sensors. The 13 megapixel sensors are relatively the cheapish ones that are generally used by Moto, whereas the 12, even though it's got less megapixels, usually a larger sensor with larger pixels. It's, for a while, I think one of the Motos and the G series, 2 or 3 generations back, used the same sensor as the Pixel AK or the Nexus at the time.
Oh wow!
Which wasn't a bad sensor. Or the same Pixel. It was a G5. The G5, Moto G5, used the same sensor as the Galaxy S7 at the time.
Wow.
Yeah, not bad, right? So my point is, like that. I agree with you that you can't like put any like obviously image processing is even more important than the software is more important than the hardware in many times, right? Look at what the Pixel can do. But I'm saying like generally you can get a good feel. Like if you 13 is generally that's a cheaper sensor. If you see 12, it's generally a higher quality sensor. If you see 16, it could go either way. There's a whole bunch of 16 megapixel sensors, and 20 is the same thing. So to me, I'm not sure I'd want to spend $200 on that G7 Play for that 2 gigs of RAM, 720p display, and small camera. I feel like there are better values to be had out there. For example, and again, this is subjective because you have to look at the software, right? These are the Moto has really light-handed software on their phones. It's very, pure Android. So it's really, really great that way, right? Yeah. And they get updates pretty regularly. So, but I was going to say, like, I recently played with the ZTE Blade Max View and Blade Max 2S, which are around the same price. And I feel like, you get more phone with these for the money, but at the same time, are they going to get updated? And you have to deal with the software. And they are only running Snapdragon 435. So they're, you're going to get much more performance out of the Play, even the 7 Play.
I totally hear you. I mean, I played with those also with the ZTEs, and they looked great. They felt great. Like they really, really were impressive for their price point. But under the software, hood, yeah.
And the hardware specs on the processor, yeah. So then the other thing is, they all have USB-C, which is great. All have headphone jacks. They all have an 8 megapixel front camera. And then let's talk about the power one, because it's interesting because the name power implies, horsepower, but it's not. It's about battery life, hence power as in like power consumption. So it's got a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, which is kind of amazing and insane to me.
It's funny that you said that when you like power to you meant something else, because that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, it must have a better processor, or like, no. And then it was the battery. So I thought that was an interesting naming convention for them. But yeah, no, the 5,000, like I would love for that to be a new standard everywhere, please.
I mean, 4,000 is starting to become pretty popular on some flagships now, and we're getting very close with the others, 37, 3,800, 4,000. So you're going to say that's not quite as big as 5, but I think, 5,000 with that 632 processor is going to be like a champ. You're going to run 3 days on that phone, no problem.
I'm sure of it. And like you said, plus their software tends to be generally very clean, so it's probably going to be really pretty well optimized for battery life.
Right. So in addition to the crazy battery, it does improve in terms of build quality and construction and materials. It has a 6.2 inch display, but it's only 720p with a notch, and it has 3 gigs of RAM, so 1 more gig of RAM. 32 gigs of storage, I think, is the base on all of them. And so that's what you get that, or you get a 12 megapixel, so slightly better potentially camera in the back, but it's a single camera in the back. But that brings us to me, I really think that once it starts getting discounted around the $250 price point, which is inevitable in the next few months, the G7, like the flagship of the three, is going to be the one to beat, right? Because you're going to get a 1080p display with a teardrop notch, 6.2 inch. You're going to get dual cameras in the back, the same 12 megapixel as the Power, but with the 5 megapixel for depth and portrait. And you're going to get 15 watt turbocharger, fast charge, and you're going to get a pretty decent 3000 milliamp hour battery, and of course 4 gigs of RAM. So that to me would be the one I would go for if you're shopping around. And you're right, at that point, like, remember how I wrote the G6 review and I was like, do you really want to spend double for a OnePlus 6? Right?
Yeah, with the G7, you're getting nearly
it's the same
good.
here. It's like, do you want to spend close to double for the OnePlus 6T or something like the Honor View 20, which is a great little phone? I don't know. I'm not convinced. I'm always a big fan of the G series, and so I'm looking forward to getting my hand on it. I've requested a review in it. I don't presume they gave you devices to play with, did they?
No, not yet.
So, I don't know. I think I'm excited. I'm surprised they decided to launch these before MWC. I felt that would have been good material for MWC, huh?
Yeah, but that seems to be the trend, right? I mean, Samsung's doing it. They decided to announce their S10 launch just a few days before MWC. That was like a complete
messing
shock for
everyone
me.
up. This is like the third podcast, my third guest that we're bitching about it now.
Yeah, because it's
such a disaster.
It's a total disaster, and it's not like they did it in London. Like it's a little hop off on the way there. It's the complete other direction. So they basically just screwed a lot of journalists from being able to make it.
Yeah, it's terrible. But, we'll live and we'll bring you the news. Don't worry. I'm sure we'll all have the stuff for you at some point. But I'm looking forward to get this G7. I'm not sure if I'd want the Power or the Play personally to even review at this point. Give me the real thing, and hopefully it drops in price. I think 300 is a little too high for this, but 250 would be freaking perfect. 249 plus tax is what I'd sell this for.
I agree with you.
It'd
totally
be great. I think right now, maybe Moto is kind of like going, hey, we've got such a successful line with the G series and everybody loves it. Maybe we can charge a little bit of a premium for it. And I think that's not the right model for this phone. Like, I think you should stick with the original formula, Moto. Make it cheap, cheap, cheap.
I hear you, but it really does feel premium. I'll give them that.
Oh yeah, but I mean the G6 last year was insanely premium. I mean, I'm now that we know they can do it at that price point, I'm not surprised, right?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, what other actually speaking of phones in that price range that I think are interesting. Do you remember at CES, one of the first briefings, I don't know if you got briefed on this, but one of the first briefings was Alcatel, and they showed us the new three Alcatel 3 phones, and they look pretty awesome for the money, honestly. I don't think they have processors this good. I think what Moto manages to do here is bring a 600 series Snapdragon to a price point of $200 to $300, which is really amazing.
Yeah. I didn't see the Alcatels. I didn't get a hands-on with them. I missed that one.
I think they were kind of like the ZTs. They felt really great in hand,
Got it.
But I'm not sure about like the software and the specs. I don't think the processor's as good. They're probably running MediaTek or something.
So it's pretty much a question of do you care about what's inside the book cover or what's on the outside, right?
And I mean, yeah, and I think, Moto's, I think, a better known, possibly more trusted brand than the other two. And then you've got the pure Android angle, like almost pure Android, and getting updates. So it's hard to say no to these. As I just feel like I would be happy to have a bit more RAM on the base model and a little bit less, like if they were like 179 or 189 even, and then 229 and 249 or 259 even, and then you had 3 gigs as the bottom line on the cheap one, I would be like, yeah, you nailed it.
I totally agree with you. I just wonder, like, what are the margins on that? But they must be there. I have no idea. I have no idea.
Neither do I. I don't think I'm going to worry about that. Honestly. Oh, man. Crazy stuff. What other phones have you played with potentially in the last year that you felt were good for the money? The other one that comes to mind, maybe you had a chance to try out, was the Honor 8X.
Yeah, the 8X is an excellent budget smartphone. It continues to impress me. It's definitely, I think until the G7 came, this new G7 came out, that would have been my favorite in like the budget smartphone.
But
range.
Did it work for you? Because I got one that wasn't a US model, because I don't think they make a US model, and it doesn't work on anything but Edge. So I can't really use it.
I know. So yeah, there's issues with the bands for US users, but the phone overall was just a
oh my
really
God, it's
great
amazing.
phone.
Yeah.
It's a shame, and we loved it. I loved it. But then it was like, well, US users are out of luck. It was such a shame.
So I took it with me to Taipei last November. I was like, since it won't work in the US, I know it'll work abroad. So let me actually spend a week using it properly with a local SIM card in Asia. And I did, and it was a great experience. It's just too bad. Like in the past, Honor has always released a version of these phones for the US market. And this year with the whole Huawei climate and the politics that are involved, it's like, doesn't look like it's going to happen, which is really a bummer.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Like we haven't, with the View 22, which is another fantastic phone. Like,
it's
what's
great,
going
isn't
on?
it?
Yeah.
I love that phone. Honestly, we've talked about this phone so much on the podcast, but I think we should do a tangent because I would love to hear what you think. Most importantly, my take is that I actually like it better, and this is a very, very kind of delicate subject. I like it better than OnePlus 6T.
So I can't give a definitive answer because I haven't reviewed it. I've only played with it. But I can see what you mean about that. I mean, I love the basically just the little hole notch, like a little hole punch. Excuse me.
So beautiful.
Yeah, that's all. And my understanding is the camera's amazing.
It's really good.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, for me, it's the same story as all Huawei and Honor phones, right? It's like, well, you got the software, this EMUI, where they call it Magic UI now, but it's the same thing. And it's just like, you put another launcher on it and you're okay, but like, will it update? At least it launched out of the box with Pi, which is great. But will it get updates? The Mate series, like the Mate 20 Pro I has received a lot of updates. So I'm pretty happy with Huawei's track record on updates. But will Honor follow suit with the View 20? I don't know. I hope so. That's my biggest concern right now, because honestly, I can kind of get over the skinning because I can use my own launcher. But the design, the display, I think hole punch is the way to go if short of having some sort of weird slider thing. If you want, like the notch just gets in the way. Once you've experienced hole punch, like you can watch a video on that, and that hole is in the corner at the bottom. You don't even notice it. It's not really a problem at all anymore.
I've had a hands-on, I haven't reviewed it, but like I totally see that being like, it's like you don't want to go back after you've had that. Totally.
And then, the camera, as you said, it's not like Mate 20 or Pixel grade. It's very good. It does some things very uniquely that, as I touched on the podcast last week, it's like, it does. Jaime was my guest, Jaime Rivera Pocket now. And we both have had the phone for a while. And it's interesting because it's like, it has this weird, crazy 48 megapixel mode where it does multiple photos, kind of like night mode, but for daytime. And it gives you these incredibly detailed 48 megapixel shots at the end.
Wow.
And that's kind of it's kind of a bit of a one trick pony for that. But because the rest of it is good, I mean, don't get me wrong, but so is the OnePlus 6T. I mean, the camera on OnePlus 6T is improved quite a bit since launch, in my opinion, in terms of software. They're really fine tuning it. And it's, it's not, again, not Pixel 3 or Mate 20 quite there, but if you look at Engadget's review of the OnePlus 6T, they finally published a review recently. Richard Lai took it for a spin in Hong Kong for several weeks, and he took a lot of comparison photos with the Pixel 3 and the Mate 20 Pro. And I'm surprised how well the 6T held its own there. It was amazing, actually.
I'm not that surprised. It's weird. The 6T, I've noticed that sometimes it just will take better photos than the other phones in certain conditions.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he found too. And I'm surprised by that because I haven't really put them side by side so much, but I've kind of always defaulted to be like, I'll take photos with OnePlus 6T, without thinking too much. But if I have something really important, I will pull out my Pixel or my Mate 20 Pro, It's kind of the same with the View 20. I feel like the View 20 is kind of like okay overall, but then it has that one trick of the super high quality, the some clarity mode, whatever they call it, 48 megapixel, and that just blows your mind. It's like, wow.
Sure. Well, I find like for my most well-rounded camera smartphone, it's the Mate 20 Pro because it pretty much does everything really well. But the Pixel still just those portraits are just mind-blowing.
Selfies, the selfies.
Yeah.
Like the OnePlus 6T and the View 20 don't even come remotely close to what, even the Mate 20 Pro, forget selfies. Like you need to use a Pixel 3 for selfies. They're just incredible. Yeah. Right?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. So that's kind of, my take on these, on the G7 Moto. Of course, you played with them. I haven't, but it's kind of like, based on my past experience and what I've read, living vicariously with all you folks, I'm looking forward to getting one. And it's interesting to see these phones at that price point, making you ask, well, should I spend the extra $200 or $300 to get a View 20 or a OnePlus 6T? In the same way as these phones make you think, should I spend an extra $500 on a Note 9 or Mate 20 or a Pixel 3 XL, right?
Yeah, totally.
We live in a really strange time.
And then when you're spending $1,300 on an iPhone, 10s Max, I mean, it's ridiculous. What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's terrible. I don't think I would this year. Like I bought the iPhone 10, the original, because I felt it was like a leap forward in technology, but I haven't bought an iPhone and I don't get review units from Apple. So I haven't bought an iPhone this year because honestly, if I had to buy one, if I had to replace my iPhone 10, if it broke tomorrow and I needed an iPhone, I'd buy a 10R in a heartbeat.
I hear you.
It's my favorite.
I hear you. I kind of have buyer's remorse for my 10s Max, especially when the camera's just nothing special. It's just sad.
Exactly. And I think that the 10R takes better portraits because it has a single lens and it has to use that faster aperture, faster lens. That it doesn't use the tele like the 10S and 10S Max. And because of that, it captures much better portraits in low light, even though the bokeh is more synthetic because it doesn't use a second camera to figure it out. And I feel like battery life's insane. The display, it's not an OLED. The OLED is always going to win. But man, it's a good IPS panel. Just like the View 20 has an IPS, and it's such a good IPS panel. I think people shouldn't get stuck up on that. I think, and then the colors. I mean, come on.
I want more colors on phones. Where are they?
Yeah, right. That's the other thing I love with the View 20 is that crazy blue I have, and then there's that crazy red.
Yeah.
They're pretty hot.
Those V's, that V-shaped thing going on, it's awesome. It's unique. It's different. They really did a nice job with that.
I have an Oppo R17 Pro that I just received. I still need to publish my unboxing video. And it's, how the Mate 20 Pro and the P20 Pro have there's that option for the twilight, the kind of like sunset color on the back.
Okay.
there's
Yeah.
a Mate 20 Pro version that looks like,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
purple to blue shading
Yeah,
thing.
yep.
And the P20 Pro actually, I think the P20 Pro did it even better before that. Well, guess what? The R17 from Oppo, R17 Pro, has the same kind of gradient, but instead of being like along the length of the phone, it's along the width of the phone.
Interesting.
And it carries over into the chassis. So one half, the left side of the chassis is blue, the right side is purple.
I haven't seen that.
And it's frosted. It's not shiny.
Okay.
So
I
it's
gotta look this up.
it's kind of frosted like the white OnePlus 6 was frosted.
Yeah, yeah.
Like slightly matte looking. It didn't feel like
Which
it didn't
I
feel like
loved.
glass. It just
Yeah.
felt like plastic, but it was glass. Yeah, I think that we're gonna see more and more funky colors. And I know a lot of people end up putting them in a case and whatever, but I'm just like, that's what I like about the 10R. Is like you get these choices of colors. It's very Apple,
Yeah, we need to go back to that trend, and hopefully, like companies will start to do more and more of that instead of just
Totally.
like rose gold.
So you were at the briefing. You got a briefing in New York for the MediaPad M5 Lite from Huawei back in December before CES, right?
Yes.
What is your thoughts on that? Because I just unboxed it. I'll put the YouTube link in my show notes, but I want to see what you think. Like iPad kind of wins for me in terms of tablet, right? I mean, if you're going to buy a tablet, might as well get the ecosystem that goes along with the tablet. But if you can't afford it, what do you think of the MediaPad M5 Lite?
I think it's a great value. It felt really good. It felt, I don't want to say ultra premium, but it felt pretty premium. The display was nice. I think it's a great family tablet. But for me, like what I thought was like the killer value proposition was the fact that it works with a stylus, right?
Mhm.
Because like if you want an iPad Pro, it's going to cost you a fortune to get that pen to work with it. It's just
Doesn't the pen also work with a cheap iPad now?
I'm
I'm pretty sure.
don't recall.
Okay.
But which then changes my value proposition statement. So,
I think you can, but I'm not 100% sure. But I know that, when they did the education event a year or two ago, they introduced the pen support for the base iPad as well.
Well, I do remember that they introduced it for like a 10-inch and the 12-inch. So like they gave it, because originally it was just like the larger iPad, I believe. And then they brought it down to the smaller iPad. But I don't think that there's the cheap budget iPad has support for it. But I have to look at.
I don't know. I'm not an iPad user.
Yeah.
Somebody please tell us on Twitter when you get this podcast. You're like, you idiots!
Yes,
Seriously,
yeah, I know,
how can you be tech journalists and not know this?
I know,
And
right?
I'm looking
a little
forward to your
ashamed.
scorn and your
Yeah.
corrections. Thank you very much, folks.
We deserved it this time.
Totally do.
But even with that said, like I still think it's a really good value. I mean, it's like $299 approximately, and you're getting a great display. You're getting decent performance. It's got that parental control software on it too, which I think gives it a lot of value. Which is going back to what I said. It's a really great family tablet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And 5 years ago there were so many family tablets. It was like everywhere you looked, someone else was coming out with like another Android tablet, and it was too much. But now like there isn't too much of it. And like if you want to get an iPad alternative, whether you want to save money or you just like Android, there isn't that much out there now.
True that, yeah. And I like it's $299 and it comes with a pen in the box with it. No matter what, if the base iPad supports a pen, it's an extra $99 no matter what, right? You're not going to get it in the box.
It's expensive.
So it's expensive. So I think if you can live without the great app ecosystem of the iPad, you're just doing like content consumption, like watching Netflix or whatever, and you want to jot around a little bit with the pen, and you want a great device you can pass to your kids without them messing up your actual work stuff, because there's that really cool kids mode that's really easy to set up. I think this is a pretty decent tablet for the money. That's kind of my takeaway so far.
I mean, on one hand, like iPad and iOS, their apps are definitely so much better on tablet than it is on Android. But then on the other hand, realistically, what are you doing mostly on the tablet? You're surfing the web, you're watching videos, you're watching Netflix. Like you probably, and maybe you're playing games, which you can probably get on both platforms. So I bet if you drill down to what people are really using the tablets for, the Huawei does more than enough.
Absolutely. And I think, really, I think there's definitely an argument to be made for the iPad Pro because, like there's all kinds of content creation apps for people who are artists and draw and paint and whatever. And then there's also like all these great music apps. If you're a DJ or if you're like a recording, a musician and you need, really good music apps, there's a whole bunch of selections. You can even really do pretty good video editing on iMovie on the iPad Pro, and it's got quite a bit of oomph to support that, even up to 4K, right? But that's not the kind of use case that most people buy tablets for, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The iPad Pro has really become a pro machine.
Yeah. Gee, you think they would pick another name? No, I'm kidding. I think that's my point, is that it's like, if you're going to go if you're going to get an iPad, and really invest in the ecosystem of great apps, you're going to be a creative type and you're probably just going to buy a Pro, right?
Yeah.
And otherwise, just, at the low end, buy a Fire tablet and be happy, right? At that in between, like, then you have to start considering, should I buy a base iPad, whether it has pen support or not, or should I look at something like the MediaPad M5 Lite? And that's kind of where I think it kind of stands out. It's like, well, it's affordable, comes with a pen, included for free, and a good kids mode, and it does pretty much everything you'd expect. The only thing that I wish it doesn't have is Android 9, so it's running 8. It's Oreo still. So,
but I feel like on a tablet, that's not such a big deal.
Yeah, probably doesn't matter, right? So, and USB Type-C, woohoo! Yeah,
it's the little things.
Little things. One charger rules to rule them all. So that's kind of my take, and I'm glad you feel the same way. I got at the briefing, I was kind of like, yeah, whatever, I don't really care. But then I played with it a bit, and I was like, oh, this is enough. So this is actually pretty okay. And then when they offered me one, I was like, yeah, I'll take it with me. Maybe I'll watch some Netflix on the plane or something.
Yeah, and it was a great display for the money.
That's true. It's an IPS, but it's pretty bright and has pretty good color saturation, good blacks, all that stuff. So yeah, tablets. I don't know. It's a tough sell for Android to have a tablet ecosystem, but at the same time, when you see stuff like that, you kind of go like, okay, this makes sense. So yeah, let's see. There's a bunch of news items. You've been following the Galaxy S10 rumors. There's more piling on every day.
Exactly. It's starting to get overwhelming. It's like, oh, come on, guys. What's it going to be?
So the one that stood out for me this week, since we have to kind of like, might as well cover them since, it's coming up real soon, is that the 10e, the kind of the cheaper model, the one that doesn't have the screen that kind of has the curved edges that fall, like the waterfall type edges that we're used to on Samsung phones. The 10e will be more like have bezel all the way around in the traditional sense, but it's a almost full screen phone. It looks like it's going to be designed to compete with the iPhone XR. And what's interesting to me is that, it looks like the higher end Samsung Galaxy S10s will have in-display fingerprint readers, probably ultrasonic ones from Qualcomm, which is exciting because so far in-display fingerprint readers have been optical and they haven't really been that great. But this 10e has the fingerprint sensor, according to a leak here. I'll link to an article. It will be on the side of the phone, kind of like embedded in the power button, like Sony's done in the past, like Moto's done in the past. Interesting little tidbit, huh?
I think this is a really, really smart move on Samsung's part because people don't need, they need to innovate and they need to keep up with the Joneses, like they need to have the in-screen fingerprint reader. They need to, they've really kind of lagged behind lately. So they need to be innovating and catching up. But at the same time, most people do not give a crap, right?
Yeah, and also if you're trying to compete with the 10R and maybe beat the 10R in price, right? With this 10e phone from Samsung, then why not, go for, save a bit of money and put a regular fingerprint reader in the power button? I don't think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I wouldn't be surprised if this S10e really does come out and it ends up being successful. Especially if they can even price it more affordably than the XR. It's even better.
I'm hoping. Let's see what happens. It'll be exciting.
I mean, I will say, though, I'm a little bit hesitant when it comes to Samsung and budget phones because I feel like they're really great when it comes to the high end, not so great when it comes to the low end.
True.
But hopefully, like this will gravitate more towards the high end.
But don't forget that they do have a mid-range, a whole ecosystem of phones that are very well received in their markets. They're not sold in the US. I mean, maybe one of them is. It's the A series, right? So there's the A7, A8, A9, and A8 Plus and or A8S or whatever. They're all really quite high end in terms of their displays. They were the first to introduce the hole punch. They do a lot of testing of technology that ends up in the Galaxy S series on the A series, but at a mid-range price. Like they have one that has 4 cameras in the back.
Wow.
It's the A9, I think. So my point is that we don't see those here. So of course, you walk into the carrier store and you see the crappy Samsung, whatever it is, prepaid phone, right? And it's crap. And then next to it, you have the Galaxy S series, right? Or the Note. But there's kind of no in between in the US much. Right. Whereas, there's a J series, but that's pretty low end. I think the A series is a series I wish we got to review and play with, because I have a feeling that it's kind of like the Moto G, It's kind of got a good following abroad, and it's a bit of a sweet spot. If you want a Galaxy and you want to stay in the Samsung ecosystem and Siri and all that stuff, not Siri, Bixby and all that stuff, that it might be the ticket.
Yeah, no, I think this is definitely promising.
Yeah, so I think the S10e is going to be a little higher end than the A series, but definitely kind of the budget end of the S series, which I think is really smart. I think it's going to be. I have a feeling you're right that it's going to be the bestseller of the 3. Just like I think potentially the 10R might be the bestseller right now. Do we really know?
I feel like I've seen that, but then like Apple's been really secretive too lately, so who knows? Like yeah, I know it is. When they have good news, they share the good news.
True, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. To me, I'm pretty bullish on the 10R. I think the XR is a great phone, so I kind of want it to do well. But hey, I can't control that, so whatever. Other S10 news is hello copycat. Reverse wireless charging. It looks like the FCC documents that were filed for the S10 revealed that it has some sort of wireless charging and potentially might be able to be used as a reverse wireless charging. So be able to charge other devices rather than be charged wirelessly. Kind of like the Mate 20 Pro.
Yes. It's just so crazy how like Huawei has really become the innovator.
I know, right?
But they're not getting the credit. I mean, a big part of that is because they can't release phones here in the US.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, like I'm sure, for people in the US are going to be impressed with that, or at least talk about it. But yeah, Huawei did it. It used to be Samsung was the one who innovated. It's kind of crazy.
I think it's exciting. I really like what Huawei's been doing, and I can't wait to see what they're going to do with the P30, which hopefully we'll see at MWC, right?
Me too. If Huawei, if you're listening, it needs to have the Mate 20 Pro in most areas. It's optics, but please copy the selfies and the portraits from the Pixel. that is Definitely. All. That is what I'm looking for. And
give us a better in-display fingerprint reader, like ultrasonic one, because the optical ones are problematic at best.
Well, now if we're going off on a tangent, one more thing for the Mate 20 Pro.
Sure, go for it.
I don't like curved edges.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan either. That was, I mean, it makes the phone narrow, which I really enjoy. But other than that,
it's pretty and it's nice to hold. But I find it annoying. I'd rather just have a wider display with more real estate that's like not bent. I don't like bent real estate.
Yeah, I agree. Also, there's always some kind of weird optical aberration, some kind of weird, like weird banding and stuff happening at those edges, which I don't like.
Yeah. I think it was. I think they implemented it really well. It's a beautiful phone, but I could do without it for the next P series
version. Yeah. Well, the Mate and the P are very different, and true. I think the P might stick with a more traditional design, probably a hole punch, honestly, but with an OLED, which will be really interesting. So speaking of more Samsung rumors, because I know that we're going to get about 5 a day for the next week.
Yeah.
Folding phone teaser. They have a little video that they posted, that teases their folding phone. I mean, of course, right?
We knew this was coming.
Right. I mean, it's like, we're just letting you know it exists in case you missed it at this point. Like,
right.
If it's not obvious to you that a big chunk of the press conference in San Francisco is going to be dedicated to the folding phone, then, you should reevaluate your priorities.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just curious, to see how well this is going to be implemented when it finally rolls out on stage. Because all the foldable phones that we've seen so far, I mean, there was that one at CES, the Royale. I don't even know how they pronounce it. Oh yeah,
the Royale, yeah.
Yeah. It was cute. I mean, like when I was playing with it, it was actually a lot more fun than I expected it to be, but it was still bulky as hell.
I mean, it didn't fold, it folded into something that was thicker than an inch by maybe an inch and a half. It was just not pocketable. And I think they just did it to be first. I don't think this is a product that we'd want to buy, but I have a feeling that, Huawei and Samsung and others in this space could implement something that is more realistically usable, right?
Well, that's what I'm hoping for. But then you think of a first generation device. First generation is always just so wonky. And it kind of gives me a little bit of not as much faith. I'm really hoping, I'm really excited for something that's slim and makes sense and something that you want to use and put in your pocket. And what was it? The ZTE? Oh my God, it just totally flew out of my head. But
the watch
the
thing from IFA?
No, the ZTE Axon M.
Oh, M, the Axon M, the dual display one. Yeah.
I mean, you got to give them tons of credit for coming out with really the first foldable smartphone, but it wasn't, and it was a pretty nice phone, but it wasn't practical. It was just a little too bulky, a little too fragile, that it couldn't
and
be
under
your
spec.
primary.
It came out with an 821 and the displays were 16 by 9 instead of 18 by 9. Right. There was a lot of bezel, and it's basically, by the time AT&T approved that phone and we finally got it in the US, it was basically about a year old technology,
Right. And that's what I'm afraid of. I don't that would be so disappointing if we get something similar like that from Samsung.
Yeah. I don't think we'll get that. I think it'll be probably a little bit pie in the sky. We'll still scratch our heads about how useful it is to have a device that turns from tablet to phone, and especially running Android, since there's no tablet ecosystem there really to speak of. But it'll be cool, and the nerds will love it, and they might sell a few, and eventually they'll refine the process, and it'll become a good thing. I think, hopefully.
Yeah. Or it'll be like 3D TVs, and it'll be like, yeah, it never happened.
Right. These are not the droids you're looking for.
Exactly.
And then speaking of that, I think that of MWC related rumors and is that LG's G8, which is obviously the next logical phone they're going to be launching, which they're definitely going to be launching at MWC. In addition to the teaser we had a few weeks ago of them having some sort of gesture-based thing where you can hover over the phone with your hand and make it do stuff, which has been done before and is not really that exciting. We're now finding out that in order to make that happen, obviously, they're going to have a time-of-flight selfie camera, basically a Face ID type sensor in the front of the phone, very much like what we've seen on iPhones. And on the Oppo Find X, which was the first Android phone with a time-of-flight selfie cam, and of course since then the Mate 20 Pro, which uses a Face ID-like sensor for depth. So it'll be interesting to see, if this is a new implementation of time-of-flight, or if it's what we've already seen on other phones, just crammed into a G8. I have a feeling that LG will push the envelope, and this might be not just for face authentication, but for gesture recognition that they've been talking about, and also probably for depth sensing for portraits, which, back to what you were saying about, I wish all phones, at least flagships, took portraits as well as the Pixel 3 and well, I guess that's the only Pixel 3 is really the player here, in my opinion, that it'd be nice to have another option, right?
Yeah. And that's what we need.
We need more selfie-capable phones.
Priorities.
So let's see what happens. I'm excited to see I really am excited to see what LG is going to bring to the table. I really love their phones. The G7 last year was pretty solid. The V40 is one of my favorites of last year. Despite it kind of getting, destroyed a little bit in terms of, it kind of came out at the beginning of that October phone apocalypse and quickly lost steam because of it, right?
Right. Yeah, it was a very, very highly competitive time to release a phone. It's like, oh, we have great optics, and then wait, look who just came out, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. So it's hard. But I feel like LG, I feel like they really are good when they innovate and they come out and they really come out with really cool, they do things really well. But sometimes they have phone announcements that aren't as dynamic. So it'll be interesting to see which way they go for this one. Is, as far as design, I'd like to see them beef things up, because that's been one of my biggest problems with the V40 and the G7. Both really solid phones, but the design was just really uninspiring for a flagship.
I agree.
And it wasn't that it's not attractive; it's an attractive, sleek phone. It's just, I wanted more from them, and especially when these, what was it, the LG G5 with the leather, the leather cover,
that was a G4.
G4, okay. So they know how to be innovative in that space, and they've done some really fun, wacky things. I love the G4.
It was a great phone.
So I'd like to see more of that, just design wise, and maybe that means bringing a really cool gradient, copy a little bit from the other guys if you need to, but just. It's getting the current design scheme is a little too bland for me, and that's something I want to see from them.
Yeah, you're right. It's true. It's been very conservative in terms of design. It's not ugly or anything. It's just kind of meh. It could be anything. Yeah, forgettable.
I was sitting with a bunch of journalists, and we had I think it was the V40, and I can't remember which other phones, and all of us got confused. We didn't know it was an LG V40. And I think that speaks a lot. We should have been able to identify it in a split second.
I agree, 100%. Yeah, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see what they bring. I'm hoping for something a little more interesting, new materials, new designs. Kind of Apple has its design language, and even Huawei to some extent has its design language, and definitely Samsung has it. Come on, LG, give us something meaty that we can sink our teeth into here.
Exactly. And we know they can because they have.
Oh, of course they can. I mean, and don't do it in an awkward, weird way like you did the G5 with the modular. It was such a disaster, that phone. Yeah. I felt so bad about it. Thankfully, the G6 redeemed itself, and the G7 as well. Right. But the G6, I felt in design was way more creative than the G7. It was the first 18:9 phone on the market, first of all. And secondly, I just love how the bezel on the front, if you had the white one, was white. I kind of like it when phones are not, have a front that's not black around, around the screen.
And yet no one does that.
It stands out.
Yeah,
it's
not
different.
enough. Not no one, but you don't see that enough.
You don't see that very often. Yeah. It used to be very commonplace, and LG used to do it all the time back in the 16:9 large bezel days. And it looked striking. You're like, oh, look at this phone. It's got a white bezel. And Apple does it on their older phones, like the 7 and the 6s and the 8th. They have the big bezel that's white if you buy a white phone.
I agree with you.
Instead of a black. I kind of like it. I think
it's disjointing, like a black frame and then
the white back. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. Interesting. So then there's a couple of articles that came out this week about OnePlus. Of course, OnePlus is going to be at MWC, and supposedly they're going to show a 5G prototype of their phone. If you remember, Helena, you were at the Qualcomm thing in Hawaii with us, right?
Yes.
So you remember how OnePlus was up there on stage all gung-ho about being one of the first to make a 5G phone for 2019?
Yeah.
Well, the news is there'll be a prototype at MWC. I'm kind of looking forward to that one.
Do we know what the networks are like over there? Do they have 5G over there?
I don't know. That doesn't matter because they will probably have temporary 5G at MWC. 4G, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
4G. I don't know. For me, it's I'm excited for a prototype. I hope it looks just like their other phones and it's not very different. But I'm so skeptical just because the only 5G demo I've seen, it was in such a controlled environment.
Oh yeah.
That
if you even want to call that a demo, I had a big rant about that on the podcast.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, okay, it's exciting, but I can't use it. So I don't know how excited I am yet.
I'm not so interested, honestly, in seeing 5G actually happen on the phone, like speeds or whatever. I don't care. I know that's achievable and that's fine. And it's only going to affect so few people because you need the networks to roll out and whatever. What I'm more interested to see is what they do in terms of design to make it look like, you know how first 4G phones had terrible battery life and were bulky and thick. And like, I'm hoping that we can, the first round of 5G devices at MWC, like not devices that are hotspots, like real like phones are, you know, close to as sexy looking as what we're used to with 4G today.
So that's interesting because I'm just expecting them to look just like 4G. I know the history has proven us otherwise. Like you said, like when you jump to the different, like when you jump to 4G, the early handsets, they were, you know, bulkier. But for some reason, I just assumed that 5G was going to be different. I don't know if that's me being very too optimistic, but we'll see. I guess that'll be it. That is a very good point. And now I'm actually pretty curious to see what the prototype looks like.
Well, that's exactly kind of why I think this is exciting. And also just building up hype for OnePlus. And, you know, they've grown so much this past year as a company. It's kind of insane. And in fact, you know, the second part of this OnePlus news is that they are now in the top 5, ranked in the top 5 phones in the US, which is kind of insane if you think about it.
So I got that press release too. To me, it was like the top 5 premium phones or something.
Yeah, well, I mean,
yeah. So,
but if you think about it, though, the US is built on premium phones. Like people, who do you know buys a G series phone here?
Okay, that's a valid point.
We love the G series from Moto. We talked about it for 25 minutes. It's important, but is it really important in the US market? I don't think so. I think that in the US, everybody just walks into a carrier store and just buys a phone and puts it on a monthly plan and doesn't think about how much money they just spent.
You've totally got a valid point.
I mean, it's. I'm not saying it's the right decision. I'm not saying it's the wisest decision, but it seems to be what people are doing continuously.
You've got a valid point. But I mean, there are a lot of budget phones being sold even here. I don't know. I just feel like that skews it's still impressive. The fact that they're in the top 5, even if it's just for premium, that's still amazing, especially when all these much bigger companies are struggling. So I definitely will say it's impressive. I don't know. It
just proves to me that having a carrier agreement does make a difference.
Oh, for sure. In the US, it absolutely does.
And so, I don't know. I think it's interesting. And, you know, I wish them luck. I hope that they can maintain that kind of that edginess that they have as a kind of like a player and that undercutting of the big boys that they've had for a while. And that they don't just become another mainstream boring thing, you know?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too, because I just feel like, it's like once you start sleeping with the devil, right? How does that affect you, right?
Totally.
We'll see. We'll see what happens with them.
So the last little bit, and I only put this in there because we kind of talked about it with Jaime last week. You know, Oppo, Vivo, OnePlus, they're all part of BBK, a bigger company. They have a lot of autonomy, but they do share some technologies. And this V15 Pro that we talked about last week that was rumored to come out has now become a little more official. This is a Vivo V15 Pro. And it announced the phone and that it features a 32 megapixel pop-up selfie camera that's electric. So it's like the Oppo, not Oppo, the Vivo Nex that they did in the summer, where, you know, there's an electric front camera that comes out of the top edge of the phone. And it's, of course, got a full screen display with no bezel because of it. But they went crazy and put, instead of like a 5 megapixel or 8 megapixel or whatever was in the original, they put a 32 in there. And it's got a triple camera system in the back, according to the photos. Wow. I mean, yeah, right. It's crazy. And this is mostly the ad for it was for the Indian market. So, you know, India is very price sensitive, even though they're a huge market and they tend to buy more and more expensive phones now. But it means that this price has to be The price on this has to be pretty damn great. So I'm kind of excited to see a phone with a motorized selfie camera with a 32 megapixel sensor, even though hopefully it doesn't mean anything, as we know, pixel count. But it could be interesting if it's done right, and that it has a triple camera system in the back.
Yeah, I mean, the specs definitely on paper sound very impressive. But to me, like, this whole pop-up thing just is so ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, but that's kind of why I love it. It's like, you gotta like the fact that we have this kind of weird, proliferation of odd form factors to all be the first to have a full screen phone,
Oh, I definitely, it keeps things spicy. So I'm glad that they're doing it.
Yeah.
Would I ever buy a phone like that, even if I was overseas? No. I'm just like, just give me a hole punch and call it a day.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm 100% on board with that. Less moving parts, less things that can break. You can make it water resistant if you have to, all that good stuff. And, honestly, I'm just excited because these are China or India phones. They're not going to make it to the US. And I just like, if they send me a review unit, like they sent me the Oppo R17 Pro to play with, I'm on board. Like, I want to try them out. I want to see what it's like, So I do keep an eye on these Chinese phones because I think they tell us a little bit about where things are going, and they're a little wackadoodly,
Yeah,
and that's kind of fun. It brings a bit of fun to the table.
I agree. I hear it. It kind of makes you feel like Inspector Gadget. Like it's like they're toys. Why can't it? I don't know how to
Google
explain
Gadget
that.
selfie pop-up camera.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. There's another piece of news that I want to throw in here that you might have something to say about. Eero got purchased by Amazon. Eero, the mesh router startup from the Bay Area here. That just dropped this morning, and I was just like, oh, maybe yesterday. I think it was yesterday. But the point is that it's like, how close are we to having Amazon Echo speakers that cost $30 that are also mesh Wi-Fi routers in every room?
It's the beginning of the end. Or maybe
it is, right?
It's the end of the beginning. I'm not sure.
And that obviously Google has Google Wi-Fi and they have Google Home. And it's also only a matter of time till they merge the two. In every room you have a speaker that's also a Wi-Fi, like a Wi-Fi router, mesh router. And it just makes sense to me.
I mean, I'm sitting here with Google and Alexa listening, and who else knows who's listening? Who knows, right?
Cortana,
yeah,
and Bixby,
yeah,
and Siri, and you got them all now.
Yeah, they're all listening, and we know it. And Facebook, and so conspiracies aside, this still creeps me out because this gives them like a whole other level of access to us. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, how much we're becoming more and more reliant on Amazon. It's scary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, that's kind of the news for the week. And I'm excited. I'm looking forward to MWC. I think we're going to see some cool stuff. It's always a fun show. I don't know. I'm also looking forward to seeing you there. I'm sure that we'll run into each other at some point.
Of course. You can't get rid of me so easily.
You're supposed to do that with an evil laugh at the end.
Oh yeah, I know, right? I got to practice my cackle a little bit more. But yeah, no, I'm very excited for at least the first day and a half. And I suspect that after the first day and a half, it's just going to kind of slow down the news stories. And, it usually just moves into the enterprise stuff, which personally I'm not as interested in.
No.
But and the other thing I'm interested in is to see how much of Samsung's announcement will affect the announcements happening just a few days later at MWC. So that'll be interesting this year.
Yeah, we'll see how they adjust, if they adjust, and how quickly they adjust, right?
Yeah, I feel bad for any company. And on the other hand, this is actually, it gives the opportunity for LG and whoever else to actually steal the show.
Totally. But it's interesting to me because every few years this happens where some big company does not launch at MWC, like Samsung or LG or both, and they do it either before or after and kind of mess up the entire flow in a way. I mean, I do kind of like it better when everybody launches at MWC somehow.
Yeah. But it's been a while since I think everybody was on that same page.
True. Yeah, it's been a while. Well, we'll see. And obviously, we'll be there to report and let you know what the dealio is with everything. So speaking of, do you want to tell people where on the internet they can find you so that they can follow all your MWC coverage?
Yes. Well, please head to geekspin.co, not .com. We're also on Twitter and on Instagram as Geekspin Co.
And .co, you got it. Where can people find you if they want to follow you specifically?
I am Helena Stone on Twitter and Helena T. Stone on Instagram.
Woohoo! Instagram, yay. Good, lots of good stuff there. Follow Helena. She's fun. Lots of great insights and content. And GeekSpin is great. And I write for GeekSpin sometimes. So, keep an eye out for my reviews there. I last reviewed the OnePlus 6T. So if you need your OnePlus 6T review fix, go check it out on geekspin.co. You know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL. That's on my Twitter and Instagram handles. Like Tankgirl, the comic book without the vowels. And I have a YouTube channel that goes as a complement to this podcast. It's called the Mobile Tech Podcast channel, and it's under my name on YouTube, youtube.com/Miriam Jouar. Spell out my full name and you'll get to it. Check it out, subscribe, tell your friends. Watch the videos. They're mostly unboxing, hands-on, that kind of stuff. I'll have a whole series of videos that I'll be making at MWC to go along with a couple of podcasts I'm hoping to do on site. So, if you want the kind of like the early access basically to the stories that I'm going to be discussing on the show, check out the channel. And of course, if you just happen to stumble upon this podcast this week, mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL. You can find the RSS feed there. But I'm also on all the big platforms, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, even TuneIn Radio. So you have no excuse to not subscribe and sign up and tell your friends and all that good stuff. And before we go, I just want to quickly thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible.com is where it's at for audiobooks. And if you really like reading, but for some reason you can't because you're driving or, your eyes are tired or whatever, Audible is really a good place to go. They have a really good selection read by really great narrators, and I just think it's pretty awesome. I use it myself. I recommend you sign up with the link in the show notes, and I'm going to give you the URL in a second, because then you'll get the 30-day free trial. And if you do actually subscribe to Audible, you'll help the podcast along. So the link is audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. Check it out. Thanks to Audible for sponsoring us for many, many years now. So I appreciate it, and give them some love if you're not already a customer and you're looking to become one. That's basically it for the show. Thanks so much, Helena, for being on. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, and we'll both be at MWC giving you lots of coverage. So stay tuned to both geekspin.co and Mobile Tech Podcast here for more coverage. All right, everyone. I'll catch you next week with another show. Cheers.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.